Good evening, friends. For those of you joining us this evening, we wish to reiterate the Japanese Art Society of America's strong commitment to new approaches to the arts of Japan, whether focusing on work for domestic consumption or, as this evening, objects that reached America in the decades after the opening of Japan by Commodore Perry. This fall, a phenomenal new catalog has appeared at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Collecting Inspiration, Edward C. Moore at Tiffany Company. And its progenitor is scholar and the Ruth Bigelow Riston Associate Curator of American Decorative Arts, Medill Higgins Harvey, who is one of our special guest lecturers this evening. This catalog focuses on Edward C. Moore's influence as the creative director of Tiffany Company and his phenomenal collections that were bequeathed to the Met in 1891. A wonderful chapter of the volume devoted to the Asian arts collected by Moore has been authored by Monica Binsick, the Diane and Arthur Abbey Associate Curator for Japanese Decorative Arts at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Monica will address this tonight to delve deeper into her own expertise on Japanese decorative arts and the sources that Moore had to acquire Japanese metalwork, ceramics, and textiles that are extraordinary in their own right. We will start with Medill, who will introduce Moore's activities and how Japanese works and themes inspired contemporary form and decoration in Tiffany's silver and other media. So let's turn the podium over to Medill Harvey and welcome her now.
Thank you, Amy. I will now share my screen. So Monica and I are so pleased to be here today to talk to you about Edward C. Moore, a fascinating individual who had a profound impact on art, design, and taste during the second half of the 19th century. And this group would have found him to be a kindred spirit in his enthusiasm for Japanese works of art. For the past several years, I've been researching, thinking, and writing about Moore and the transformative role he played as head of the silver division at Tiffany Company. The book I've written together with Monica and a wonderful group of curators and scholars is entitled, as Amy said, Collecting Inspiration, Edward C. Moore at Tiffany. And the exhibition the book was to accompany, which was originally scheduled for July of 2020, will take place at the Met in the fall of 24. Before I dive in, I want to say all of the objects illustrated in our presentation are in the Met's collection, unless a caption indicates otherwise. Although the name Tiffany Company immediately conjures images in everyone's mind, blue boxes, Audrey Hepburn, diamond rings, shimmering silver, Edward Moore is certainly not a household name. He was, however, the visionary responsible for transforming the stationery and fancy goods shop established in 1837 in New York City into a world-renowned silversmithing firm that set taste and fashion on an international stage. On the left is Tiffany's store at 550 Broadway, which was built in 1854, just a few years after Moore joined the firm, and served as their New York retail shop until they relocated to Union Square in November of 1870. And on the right is the flagship store, familiar to us today at 57th and Fifth Avenue. Moore's story is one of vision, ambition, innovation, and creativity. Here you see him near the end of his life in a portrait that hangs in the boardroom at Tiffany's. Moore served as head of the Tiffany Silver Division from 1851 until his death in 1891. He was truly a visionary innovator who created silver that pushed traditional boundaries, refusing to be fettered by the limits of existing technology, aesthetic sensibilities, or artistic education. Motivated by a desire to educate and inspire himself and the craftsmen at Tiffany, Moore assembled a vast collection of works of art from ancient Greece and Rome, Europe, the Islamic world, and Asia. Holdings that ranged from glass and ceramics to textiles, baskets, and metalwork. Note the backdrop Moore chose for this portrait, a pair of 14th century Mamluk minbar doors from his collection. In the book and exhibition, masterpieces of Tiffany silver produced under Moore's direction are explored together with objects from his collections, illuminating the dialogue that inspired the creativity of Moore and his team. All of the silver on the screen are works created during Moore's tenure at Tiffany's. The diverse forms, colors, textures, imagery, and techniques represent a seismic shift in the art and craft of designing and creating silverwares. With Moore at the helm of the silver division, Tiffany was transformed from a purveyor of silver and other fancy goods into the leading designer and creator of silver, not only in the United States, but throughout the world. Some of the finest and most celebrated works produced under Moore's direction are those in the Japonesque style. Inspired by the arts and crafts of Japan, Moore and his craftsmen explored new materials, techniques, design vocabularies, and aesthetic sensibilities. And the results are exquisite masterpieces, a few of which I show you here. Before turning to Moore's collection of Japanese art and the Japonesque silver it inspired, I'll provide some brief background. Born into a silversmithing family, Moore came of age working with and learning from his father, the silversmith John C. Moore. They established a partnership that produced silver sold in the finest retail shops, including Tiffany, Young, and Ellis, and secured prominent commissions for presentation silver, such as this service retailed by Ball Tompkins and Black and made in 1850 for Marshall Lefferts, in honor of his role in establishing a telegraph system connecting New York and New England. The Moore silver exhibited outstanding craftsmanship and was distinguished by beautifully rendered high relief chased or repoussé ornament, often depicting naturalistic motifs such as the grapevines we see here. Charles Tiffany, a shrewd and ambitious businessman, quickly recognized that securing an exclusive contract to sell the Moore silver would offer significant competitive advantage. So in 1851, just a year after this service was made, the Moores agreed to provide silver exclusively for Tiffany's. At this time, Edward began to assume responsibility for managing the Moore silver manufactory. This cup and pitcher are two examples of silver made in 1853 by Edward or under his supervision. And here you see the same lively chasing and energetic naturalism that characterized the Lefferts service, while both also reveal an energy, dynamic use of negative space, and penchant for asymmetry that define much of Edward's work, qualities that you all will immediately recognize apply to the Japanese works of art Moore collected as well. The agreement between Tiffany and the Moore firm proved beneficial and profitable for everybody involved. The Moore firm relocates to a building a few blocks from Tiffany's store, and by 1855, they have a workforce of 30 men and 20 boys. Edward quickly attracts a great deal of attention from the press and public alike. In 1854, the New York Daily Tribune credits him with making, quote, original designs for almost every article manufactured. Eventually, Tiffany's acquired the Moore firm in exchange for stock in the company, and Moore served on the board and ran the silver division throughout his life. So from the outset, it was clear that Edward Moore was a gifted designer and silversmith, endowed with a bold vision and ambition. Beginning in the 1860s, Moore began to study and collect works of art from diverse cultures and geographies. He sought new sources of inspiration and recognized the need to address the lack of artistic education available to craftsmen in the United States. We know little of precisely how Moore began to collect, as no invoices or diaries survive, but research conducted for this project reveals it's likely that the variety of imported goods available at Tiffany's New York store, his travels to Paris and London, where Tiffany had stores, and the time he spent at the international expositions and World's Fairs sparked his interest in and facilitated his collecting. Here are a few examples of objects from Moore's collection, which at the time of his death numbered over 2,000 objects. As you can see, his collection defies concise description. It includes a dizzying array of forms, colors, textures, materials, and techniques. That he was collecting to educate and inspire creativity meant that he was approaching his acquisitions primarily as a formalist. A pattern, motif, shape, or tone spoke to him, and he acquired it. Moore was truly a pioneering collector, particularly with respect to his interest in non-Western art. Because his approach to assembling his collections was guided by his ambitions to transform design and production at Tiffany, he acquired works not to assert financial success or social sophistication, but to serve his passion to understand and create beauty. Moore made his collections available to his team at Tiffany, and objects traveled between his home and the design studio. Here you see some of his glass, baskets, and other works of art in the design room, available for designers to handle and study. Moore never ceased refining his collection, buying and selling works throughout his life. He simultaneously pursued all of his collecting areas, so that at any given moment he might be purchasing Greek vases, Japanese kimono, and Persian metalware. Thus, thousands of objects came into and out of his hands, and by extension, the Tiffany Design Studio. Here too, you see Tiffany designers at work in a circa 1880 photograph. Moore's collections were integral to the dynamic environment in which designers and craftsmen were trained and encouraged to think in original ways. Period accounts proudly report on what was described as the quote-unquote school at Tiffany. According to an 1877 article in Scientific American, the work which Messrs. Tiffany Co. are now carrying on is of national importance, for their establishment is not only a great business concern, but a school of art. Boys are admitted at an early age and taught to design, and already many superior workmen and artists have in this way been made. Surviving diaries kept by Charles Grosjean, a silversmith who worked for Moore, serving as supervisor of the silver manufactory, document the energy and experimentation that characterized the process of designing and fashioning silverwares at Tiffany. Reading the 15 volumes, which date to the years 1877 through the early 80s, allowed me to be a fly on the wall, experiencing the hum of activity and creative energy. Throughout the diary entries, from which I'm showing you here, there are discussions of objects Moore brought into the design room to be studied. In some cases, they assayed the objects, meaning taking a scrape of metal to analyze the metallurgic makeup, as part of their efforts to understand the various mixed metal alloys used in Japanese metalwork. At upper left, he writes, "Dimes made assay of piece of shakudo and found about 3% gold, the balance copper." And in the entry at the bottom of your screen, he writes, "ECM showed me basket made to represent locusts," most definitely a Japanese basket, "a gourd teapot, a bronze with drip ornament." And he sketches the gourd teapot and the drip decorated bronze. When I embarked on this book, I was familiar with the close relationship between this 1877 Tiffany vase and the Japanese brush pot from Moore's collection, two views of which I show you here. And I fully expected to find more such one-to-one correspondences between Tiffany silver and objects in Moore's collection. After years of research, I've learned that this instance of directly referencing a specific source is most unusual, if not singular, in Moore's Tiffany silver. Instead, the design process involved a far more synthetic and hybrid approach. Moore and his team looked at many different works of art, natural specimens, and books. Moore's collection also included hundreds of books, and would then generate original ideas and designs. Moore's goal was to draw inspiration from many different sources in order to innovate and create distinctive, novel works of art. This Tiffany mustard pot of about 1879 is one such example. Most 19th century American silver scholars likely would first identify the mustard pot as Japanese in style, noting that the fields of different colors are inspired by Japanese mixed metal alloys, which Moore certainly had in mind. He also would have been thinking of works such as his Japanese 18th century copper dish, or the tonal gradations and texture of this 19th century Japanese ceramic hanging vase. However, the mustard pot's swirling fields of color also resemble Moore's 2nd to 1st century BC Greek mosaic glass jar, or his 18th century Chinese bronze incense burner with a mottled surface. And I could have selected any number of objects from Moore's collection to make this point, as Moore had a plethora of ideas in mind each time he created a design or reviewed the work of his staff. Tonight, our focus is Moore's passion for Japanese works of art, which captured Moore's imagination and inspired exquisite and inventive flights of fancy from Tiffany's designers and craftsmen. Consisting of approximately 800 works, Moore's dazzling assemblage of Japanese art includes metalwork, textiles, lacquerware, ceramics, and bamboo basketry. Japanism, or the fashion for Japanese art, as you all know well, swept through Europe and the United States following the 1854 opening of several Japanese ports for trade with the West, and Moore was on the vanguard of Japanese art collecting. He acquired exceptionally fine and rare objects, as well as relatively inexpensive collectibles from both the Edo and Meiji periods. In a few minutes, Monica will discuss and contextualize Moore's collecting and offer a closer look at some highlights from his collection of Japanese works of art. As with all of his other areas of collecting, Moore's time in Europe was formative. His collection resembles those of French Japanists. He collaborated with the well-known Parisian dealer Siegfried Bing, and one of Moore's sons, William, became a dealer of Asian art who served as a New York outlet for Bing's merchandise. Moore also contracted with the British designer and design theorist Christopher Dresser to purchase works for Tiffany during his travels in Japan in 1876-77. Asia and Japan in particular proved to be a limitless wellspring of inspiration for Moore and his team. From the beginning of the 1870s, Tiffany was producing silver ornamented with Asian decorative motifs. Moore patented a flatware pattern in 1871 that featured Japanese-inspired birds, which ultimately evolved into Tiffany's Audubon pattern. And at about the same time, a similar ornament was employed to decorate this tea set. The 19th century Japanese porcelain bottle on the right offers an example of the sorts of objects and designs to which Moore would have referred. This drawing from Moore's sketchbook illustrates the process by which he considered and worked out these Asian-inflected designs. This flat-sided geometric teapot reveals Moore and his staff's thorough engagement with Japanese sources. Designed in 1872, the teapot uses stylized chrysanthemum flowers and diagonal rods to create a rhythmic, asymmetrical composition that echoes Japanese tsuba in Moore's collection, such as the one here, and Moore's 17th century Japanese silk fragment on the right. A surviving technical manual adds to our knowledge of the ways in which Moore and his team developed inventive methods of replicating the colors, textures, and patterns found in objects in his collection. Here are pages from the manual describing how they went about laminating metals to replicate Japanese mokume, along with two Tiffany mokume objects, a match case up top and a tea caddy. And these pages outline how they achieved the varied colors and tones they observed and admired in Japanese metalwork. Note the text describes how they colored metals and alloys red, black, green, and other tones. The little sketch on the right is one of Tiffany's great masterpieces known as the Conglomerate Vase because it combines or conglomerates different metals. This 20¼ inch high vase stopped visitors to the 1878 Paris exposition in their tracks. Its myriad tones, textures, and patterns announced unequivocally to the world that Tiffany had mastered Japanese metalworking techniques and design principles. On January 24, 1878, Grosjean records in his diary that Tiffany, quote, proposed making a vase introducing all the various alloys used by the Japanese. He also notes that Moore's ideas for the decoration were inspired by a box in his collection with, quote, bold reds, greens, blacks, and browns. This Japanese 19th century lacquer box from Moore's collection offers a sense of the sort of objects Moore was referencing. His mixed metal tsuba also provide resonant examples of the contrasting tones and textures Moore sought to emulate in the vase. This 19th century Japanese gourd-shaped hanging flower basket demonstrates Moore's interest in gourds, which enliven this vase and appear on countless Tiffany silver designs throughout the 1870s and 80s. The reverence Japanese art expresses for the natural world clearly struck a chord with Moore, and the Japonesque silver created at Tiffany consistently references nature's flora and fauna. This Japanese knife handle from Moore's collection also shares affinities with the Conglomerate Vase, both with respect to its colors and decorative vocabulary. Here too, the dynamic interchange between Moore's Japanese collections, as illustrated by the luminous silver, gold, and mother of pearl inlay lacquer box, decorated with fluttering butterflies dating to the 19th century, and the in-row adorned with gold, bronze, and copper-hued butterfly is striking. Moore's staff would have studied a wide array of objects, books, and natural specimens when designing and executing this tray. Adapted from a design created for the 1878 Paris Fair, multiple versions of this butterfly tray were produced over the course of 10 years, attesting to its popularity and the almost insatiable demand for Tiffany's Japonesque silver. Moore's drive to invest his metalwares with color was brilliantly realized in the rich red surfaces Tiffany succeeded in producing at this time. And in 1878, they created this chocolate pot endowed with a lustrous variegated red sheen that evokes lacquerwares, such as Moore's Japanese 17th century lacquered incense box and the 19th century lacquered basketware box. Never does Moore feel bound by the limits of his medium. His quest to create red surfaces is indebted not only to lacquerware, but also ceramics, glass, and textiles. This page from the Tiffany Technical Manual reveals the extensive and exacting trial and error that led to successfully creating red surfaces. The text at the upper right shows that they found only certain copper was pure enough to redden properly. And you can see that one formula for reddening copper at the top left was later replaced by an improved formula at the bottom of that page, which I've blown up on the right. This bold red copper vase, accented with silver drips and inlaid gold, copper, and silver copper zinc alloy, also demonstrates the profound impact Moore's Japanese collection had on Tiffany silver. Surviving design drawings reveal that every detail of this design was carefully conceived, even the seemingly random looking splatters of silver on the body. Grosjean's diary records that the trompe-l'oeil effect of the cascading liquid spilling over the lip was inspired by a quote-unquote bronze with drip ornament that Moore brought into the design room. Moore's 19th century Japanese bronze vase at the upper right could well be the object Grosjean saw. Below are other objects from Moore's collection that would have informed his exploration of red surfaces. A Japanese Satsuma-ware sake bottle in the shape of an eggplant, and the formula Tiffany used to redden copper could achieve various reds and purples depending on the time it was submerged, and an Edo period no robe with various red tones. Before concluding my discussion of Moore's East Asian collecting and the silver it inspired, I couldn't resist showing you a few more examples of Tiffany Japonesque silver, which was not only incredibly popular in the late 19th century, but continues to be among the most highly sought after silver on the market today. In 1878, one critic wrote in an account of Tiffany's silver, "The artists who work under the fostering of this firm have deeply pondered Japanese forms and styles. This wide study of foreign models has led not to imitation of those models, but to adaptations that have resulted in the creation of a new order of production." So as I turn the program over to Monica, I leave you with this image of the Moore collection as it was installed when it came to the Metropolitan Museum. Moore stipulated in his will that his collection was to be given to a museum so that it could continue to educate and inspire artists and craftsmen. And his family chose to donate the over 2,000 objects and about 500 books to the Metropolitan Museum, a fitting choice given Moore's involvement with the Met as an advisor to their school and his work replicating objects in the museum collection. The Moore objects were among the earliest such material to enter the museum holdings. In 1891, there weren't yet specialized departments such as Islamic art or Asian art, and Moore's collection was installed and displayed together, as you see here. And I will now stop sharing my screen and pass it to Monica.
Thank you very much, Medill. I will start sharing my screen. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for the kind invitation. And I would like to say that it was such a pleasure to work with Medill. And I learned so much about Edward C. Moore and Tiffany. And it was wonderful to have this project going on in the museum before COVID. So in my presentation, I will highlight Edward C. Moore's collecting, and we'll talk a little bit about a specific selection from his Japanese art collection. After the 1868 Meiji reforms and the opening of the ports of the island country for trade with the West, dramatic social and economical changes followed. The daimyo and the samurai lost their political power and income, so they had to sell some of their properties. At the same time, as a consequence of modernization and westernization, some of the old artworks and household utensils became seen as outdated and were sold at antique dealers. In the open ports, especially in Yokohama, several curio shops were opened from around the 1860s, 1870s, and the foreigners arriving in Japan could easily acquire antiques in these establishments. The most well-known included the Minoda, established by Minoda Chojiro, the Musashiya, opened in 1862, and the Samurai Shokai, the Curio King. However, numerous such curio shops were ordering contemporary lacquers, contemporary ceramics, and metalworks, which were specifically created to meet the taste of the foreigners. These two trade patterns ran parallel with each other in the Meiji period. The Japanese government recognized the economic potential of stimulating the production of decorative arts and promoting these to Western curio hunters, collectors, and museums. While supporting the export of these finely crafted works, the government made efforts to restrict the outflow of the precious antique works. Concurrently, the Japanese government spent a significant amount of money to represent the new nation state at world expositions and art exhibitions, which were ideal locations to promote the above-mentioned products and the antiquities, and to be part of the international trade system and carry out market research to develop the domestic industries. A common feature of these displays was that the exhibits incorporated art and modern technology, as well as science. And as Medill mentioned, it was a very important aspect of Edward C. Moore's research into Japanese decorative arts. The domestic exhibitions were synchronized with the planning of world expositions, so that all the regions of Japan and the entire field of decorative arts and craft production could be informed about new trends in the art world. This characteristic strategy is well reflected in the contents of the Moore collection. Moore's collection of Japanese art consisted of approximately 800 works, representing a wide array of objects, including metalworks, textile fragments, snow robes, lacquers, inro and netsuke, and bamboo baskets. The collection represents what was available on the market in New York from around the 1870s through the early 1890s, as we have not found evidence Moore ever visited Japan. Many of the works are Meiji period decorative arts, which were promoted at the world expositions. However, Edo period examples such as inro, netsuke, sword fittings were also acquired by Moore. The quality of his collection is diverse. There are some exceptionally good quality works, while most of the Meiji period objects are typical of the taste of the time. Moore collected ceramics for the tea ceremony, including Edo period tea bowls and tea caddies, at the time when very little information was available about the tea ceremony in English. His collection is quite similar to those assembled by the French Japonists. However, Moore did not collect woodblock prints, which were a major source of inspiration for Impressionist painters. He visited Paris several times, so he might have seen private collections of Japanese art which inspired his collecting. As Medill mentioned, the collection was displayed as a whole in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and you can see Edward C. Moore's best bamboo basket tucked under the case on the lower right corner, a masterpiece by Hayakawa Shokosai I, a Chinese-style basket. Moore also had an extensive library, including several volumes on Japanese art, including books by James Jackson Jarvis, Ernst Schoenow, a copy of William Thomson Walter's Oriental Collection, Sir Rutherford Alcock's books, as well as catalogs of the South Kensington Museum in London. Judging from these books, it seems that Moore enjoyed reading about the history of Japanese art, its unique characteristics, such as the universality of art in Japanese culture, the close interrelationship of all the art forms, its realism and materialistic tone. The representation of nature was another dominant theme of these early writings about Japanism, emphasizing the importance of returning to the simplicity and the fundamental teachings of nature. At the same time, the imagination and creativity of the Japanese artists were also praised. Due to the lack of surviving correspondence or other documentation, it is not an easy task to reconstruct Moore's collecting. One of the most valuable resources of this research was the diary of Charles Grosjean, the silversmith who oversaw Tiffany's Prince Street workshop. According to the diary, we know that Moore acquired some of his work through A.A. Ventine's, a retail outlet for Oriental art on Broadway, selling all kinds of decorative objects, including bamboo works, stone lanterns, and ceramic vessels. He also acquired works from the first Japanese manufacturing and trading company, the Kiryu Kosho Kaisha, the New York branch, which was led by Yaya Kinsaburo and later Shugyo Hiromichi, was one of the most important sources for his collecting. Moore had a friendly relationship with Samuel Avery, a well-known art dealer in New York, who was one of the founding trustees of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and sold 1,300 Chinese and Japanese ceramics to the museum as early as in 1879, establishing its Asian art collections. Avery might have been selling Chinese art to Moore or advising him on collecting. Moore drew inspiration for his designs from Japanese art and also studied the composition of these Japanese metal alloys, focusing especially on fittings such as tsuba, fuchi, kashira, and kozuka. He approximately owned 100 of these beautifully executed masterworks. As we know, it was the World Exposition in Vienna in 1873, where Japan first participated officially as a national enterprise, with the government organizing the event and coordinating with the private sector. The emphasis of the World Exposition was on the craft works, the bijutsu koge pieces that demonstrated skillful workmanship. At the same time, the Japanese were eager to learn and master the latest modern technology from the West to improve its industries. The first Japanese manufacturing and trading company was one of the businesses supported by the Japanese government, and the company's New York City branch was opened in 1876. The Centennial World Exposition in Philadelphia in 1876 was the catalyst for the Japan craze in America. The Japanese government sponsored an extensive display of various artworks in the main building of the exhibition, and inexpensive bric-a-bracs were sold at the Japanese bazaar. Tiffany and Company exhibited about 125 silverworks, including mixed metal ones that Medill illustrated. And after the exhibition, he acquired ceramics, metalworks, lacquer, perhaps at the sales that followed the Centennial Exposition. As I mentioned, the first Japanese manufacturing company and the Shippo Kaisha were amongst the sources he relied on to build his collection. Medill mentioned briefly the importance of the activities of Christopher Dresser. The Glasgow-born designer in 1876 was commissioned by Tiffany and Company to form a collection while visiting Japan that would serve as inspiration for their silverware production. Moore continued collecting in New York. According to an 1878 entry in the Grosjean diaries, he visited James F. Sutton, who was at that time working for A.A. Ventines. In February 1878, Moore and Tiffany bought several Japanese textiles and cut them up and divided them amongst themselves. Moore also acquired ceramics from Ventines. As you can see, they have a wonderful selection, including not only ceramics, but metals and decorative artworks as well, which were popular collectibles to decorate New York City apartments. Some of the Japanese material sold at Ventines was provided by the well-known Yokohama-based dealer, Musashiya Sadajiro, who acted as Ventines' agent. According to another entry in the Grosjean diaries dated November 21, 1878, he visited Ventines to close a deal on behalf of Moore on the frog vase. The entry is illustrated with a sketch, and there are further comments on the fascination with this piece regarding the production techniques. The intriguing composition depicting two frog armies fighting each other might be based on a hanging scroll by Kono Baire, dated 1864. The frogs are represented in colorful overglazed enamels. Their eyes are in overglazed gold, and the dynamic scenes show them using lotus flower cannons and flower spears. When Siegfried Bing opened his shop in New York on the Fifth Avenue in 1887, several collectors celebrated the occasion, including H.O. Havermeyer, Charles Dana, Benjamin Altman, Charles Stuart Smith, and Edward Seymour. Many artworks from these collections came later to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. When Moore died in 1891 and his Japanese art collection entered the museum, Japan was represented only by a small selection of decorative arts. The addition of the Edward Seymour collection solidified the position and representation of Asian art in the museum when its collecting strategy was formed, and the bequest created a path that was followed by the acquisitions of further collections and individual objects. The rich content, the variety of the works, as well as the connections with the Tiffany silverware, make the Moore collection an important part of our holdings and the repository of art historical sources. I would like to close my presentation with a few artworks, a small selection from the 800 works Edward Seymour put together to illustrate the connections between the silverware that Medill introduced to us. Organic forms such as gourds, butterflies, had a major role in Edward Seymour's designs. This teapot, designed around 1878, 80, represents the connection between the gourd pattern, the dragonflies, and the butterflies, which were really, really popular in Meiji period decorative arts. The tray, also featuring the same iconography, was made for the Paris World Exposition and illustrates the mastery of the application of Japanese like metal alloys, bringing out beautiful colors and beautiful hues of these mixed metal patterns. Another example of the same techniques, the same ideas, a vase from 1878. Again, you can see the delight of the artist and the designer creating the body by hammering the silver and applying these beautiful inlays. This is a very cute composition featuring turtles, and Edward Seymour had a few Japanese okimono in his collection. Obviously, the turtles in Japan associated with longevity and good fortune, and it's possible that Moore was aware of these symbolic meanings when he selected the turtles to be included in this beautiful jardiniere. The swirl or water element was again a very dynamic design that Moore saw on tea caddies and teapots and incorporated into his silverware. Medill mentioned the frog briefly, and as you can see, the frog vase, which I briefly introduced, probably had a role in the design process of these tray around 1879, 80s. And again, I'm showing a detail of the frog vase so you can compare the composition. And these frogs each has a personality. They look individual, but Edward Seymour had frog netske in his collection as well. So he might also use some of the netske to draw inspiration for the tray. He used netske to create details such as the knob of these tea caddy. And it's a wonderful juxtaposition of the beautiful color of the ivory with the body of the caddy. The butterflies, again, a very popular pattern in Japanese art, were featured on these beautiful lacquer box with togidashi makie and mother of pearl inlays of very detailed butterflies with patterns on the wings, which was certainly appealing to the taste of the time. And again, I was very happy to see the influence of Japanese textiles, as it was really closely related to the design of these teapot in the 1870s, early 1870s. And we have a few slides to very quickly have a conversation about how the Japanese artworks inspired the silverware designs produced by Tiffany. I would like to kick it off by mentioning this beautiful no robe. It's a karaori no robe decorated with chrysanthemums, referencing longevity and kikujido. And I would like to ask Medill to say a few words about the influence of chrysanthemum patterns and this design on the silverware.
Yes, so the borrowing of the chrysanthemum patterns is quite evident. This teapot is described in Tiffany, or coffee pot described in Tiffany archives as quote unquote su chow, which was a term when we started this project, nobody knew quite what they meant, but I found descriptions, and they decided that they would combine Japanese, Chinese, Indian, and various other sort of Islamic motifs together. And what they found is that the naturalism and the layering, which you can sort of see in this slide, but in person in the no robe too, that texture, they wanted to sort of incorporate all of that into this work. And I know I noticed one question in the Q&A that was asking about Christopher Dresser, and I know there are other questions that we want to make time for, but this is an example of an object that is pretty different from the way Christopher Dresser was responding to Japanese sources.
Another example of how these no robe had an influence on Tiffany. Would you like to say a no? Let's skip it. Okay, so this is a very interesting bronze vase, which is an imitation of a bamboo flower holder decorated with butterflies. So by itself, it's a representative of the Meiji taste, and juxtaposed with this beautiful silver, it tells another story.
Exactly. And this silver also falls into this category of what they called su chow, which was basically a elaborately chased naturalism inspired by Japan, China, and various other non-Western cultures. But the result is something that is incredibly dynamic. And I also, to a certain extent in this comparison, but in many respects, something like the Japanese vase's willingness to take one medium and reference other media was something that really, I think, was transformative in terms of the way Moore and his team at Tiffany approached silver. No longer did metal have to reference metal, so that drawing on textiles and the fact that the Japanese vase is referencing bamboo, that sort of play across media was very much central to the way he was collecting and designing.
Another example, which we had a deep discussion about, this quite unusual piece is a mosquito smoker that people use to repel mosquitoes, and is decorated with irises, which for people familiar with Japanese literature is a reference to the tales of Ise. And I'm wondering how Moore took advantage of this pattern.
Well, this is, I think, more than any other motif, dragonflies and irises come up over and over again. And whether that reflects his passion and or what was popular among the public, probably a combination of both. And I always like to include this object, the mosquito smoker, because it's an example of an object. I know Monica is very diplomatic, but if you're talking about masterpieces of Japanese ceramic ware, this probably wouldn't have been on a short list. But for me, it was high on my list because of this kind of resonance. And that was some of the great joy and education for me was both finding ways in the book and the show to represent Moore's collecting and its range and its contents, but also to sort of think about that dialogue at the same time, and to realize that all of the objects are not superstars.
That's a very important point. This is a masterwork in the Edward C. Moore collection by Makuzu Kozan, representing a whimsical image where insects represented as a procession of a daimyo. And we can see representations in the silverware collection where similar animals or similar whimsical scenes were featured.
So I'm wondering, Monica, if we should go to questions, because I'm seeing quite a number of them, and I want to make sure that people get their question. I mean, Monica and I could talk together forever, and we have, and it's so much fun. But if would you like us to read the questions? Does someone want to? I don't know what the preferred approach to the questions are, but I'm happy to dive in if that appeals.
I will stop screen sharing, right?
Sure. So while we're transitioning, I noticed the first question says, could you say more about the relationship with Dresser and perhaps compare the way they responded to and adapted Japanese decorative arts? So Moore bought Dresser, some of Dresser's key publications, the moment they came out, and actually provided them to his entire staff. He bought like 20 copies, and so clearly found in Dresser a kindred spirit and somebody who he felt was very, very much sort of on the same page. So they shared a lot of interests, and certainly some of their work, I would argue, is very much sort of that same moment and responding to very similar sources. And in other respects, as I said, things like that coffee pot are totally unlike what Dresser's doing. I mean, Moore has really tight control over a group of employees, which is sort of different from the way Dresser was operating. But I think where the Dresser-Moore connection is most interesting is this back and forth that Japan was so interested in figuring out, what did Americans want? What did Westerners want? What were they making? And in fact, the Japanese sort of official delegation bought a bunch of Tiffany silver at the Paris '78 fair and took it back to Japan. And so Dresser is sort of integral to that. We sadly don't have correspondence or anything that allows us to be more than speculative about their relationships, but the way they were using Japanese art to affect real sort of design reform is is very much the same, even if the final products are somewhat different. Monica, do you see the next question?
I'm having a problem, so if you could read
So
that, would be
it
very
says,
helpful.
do you know if Moore was familiar with the designs of, I will not pronounce it correctly, Kyosai? Kyosai.
Possibly. Unfortunately, I'm not sure. I don't remember any documentation I have seen about this. So,
and then this next question is fascinating. William Van Horn, a 19th century collector of Japanese ceramics in Montreal, purchased pieces from Edward Moore in several occasions from around 1890s to 1900. I wonder if he acted as a dealer as well. So if it's after 1891, it's his son Edward, not he. And that is absolutely fascinating. And one of my first employers at the Met said, scratch a collector and you find a dealer, and vice versa. So yes, Moore was constantly, I think, buying and selling. As Monica and I both said, the documentation is limited, but where we can trace provenance, it's often fellow collectors exchanging, selling things to each other. So that connection is a fascinating one, and one I don't know much about, but I'd love to learn more. And then Monica, this one's for you. Any idea where the Mosquito Smoker was made, and is it signed?
No, it's not signed, and I tentatively wrote that it's a Sanuki ware, but it's quite hard to identify exactly.
And there's a question that says, I'm interested to know if these patterns and designs can generally be traced back to a specific artist or school. Are they associated with a particular artist or school in records, either in the US or Japan? I'm not sure if that question is about the Japanese works. Monica, do you have an answer to that? And in terms of the Tiffany silver, work was very collaborative, and many employees worked on it. Sadly, the only names that survive are the kind of most senior chasers, which was seen as the highest level of artistry. So there, in terms of individuals at Tiffany, I don't know, but the artist or school, if you're talking about artist or school records in Japan, Monica, do you have anything?
I think it's such a diverse collection that I cannot pinpoint a specific school, like, for example, the Rimpa school. This is probably what you are inquiring about. It's really a mix of Edo period decorative arts and Meiji period decorative arts. So there are certain Rimpa style works, but there are very different. There are Mingei type works. So it's really a very interesting mix.
And then Joan Mervis asks, as Moore did travel to Paris, did he visit S. Bing and similar shops while there? If so, do you think their aesthetic focus on Japanism and their establishments had an impact on the Tiffany focus on Japanism? Again, we have to be speculative because he left nothing in the first person, but I can say quite confidently the answer to that is yes. I mean, there's just the manifest evidence in the way they described the works, the way they displayed works at Tiffany, and the way the diary talks about the sorts of aesthetic sensibilities they're looking to achieve, that I would say that it certainly had a formative effect. I hope that answers the question. Monica, do you have more
Yes.
to add?
I agree.
And then lastly, Karen Zukowski asked, did Edward Moore have ties to people who lived in Japan and knew how Japanese objects were used in domestic settings? Did he care how the Japanese used objects, or was he purely a formalist? Oh, you asked such an excellent question, and one that we both spent a lot of time thinking about. He was largely a formalist, but I think he had great interest, and the limits in his knowledge and awareness are ones that Monica can really speak more intelligently about than I, but I think the clues are in the books. I mean, he bought any and every book that was published on the subject, not just of art, but of culture. So I think he had an interest. How much he actually knew about things like the tea ceremony, I think Monica can say more. Would probably not. He probably didn't know all that much, but
I think that because we have a list of his library, we have a good understanding of what he was interested in, what he was reading about, and he was certainly interested in the Japanese lifestyle as it was recorded in the contemporary literature. And he certainly had an interest in how close the Japanese are with nature, and the lifestyle was a little bit like medieval Western lifestyle. So I think that that was one of the stereotypes. And when we look back at the Meiji period literature, we feel that it's a very interesting idea, but it certainly felt that it represents a really close relationship with nature.
We want to now thank you all, Monica and Medill, for introducing a topic that obviously is so stimulating for all of us. And there's, of course, much, much more to be said on all of these facets of not only Edward C. Moore and Tiffany, but those others that they encountered during this very vibrant period. This afternoon's program is really what we intended, to continue to raising awareness about JASA's 50th anniversary exhibition that will be held in fall 2023, looking at this vibrant period when America is introduced to Japanese art. And tonight, this has been truly an eye-opening experience, and we'd like to thank you both. We'd like to also ask our audience to join us for our annual holiday program, when traditionally JASA members gather to imbibe a special holiday cocktail. This year, our subject will be Hokusai, a curatorial perspective, that will be held on December 1st at 5 p.m., when 4 distinguished curators join to share their experience on specific Hokusai works. Thank you all, and good night.
thank you.
Thank you.